Hey, what's going on, guys? It's the CD guy, Johnny Z here, and it's time for Talking Albums number 18. And today I'm going to be talking about 10 terrible rock and metal albums that are not Saint Anger by Metallica, right? We've all talked about how bad this album is ad nauseum sometimes, and it's just not worth talking about anymore. There are other albums out there that are worse or just as bad from other bands, and that's what I'm going to be trying to shine some light on here. I saw that a lot of people were uploading this kind of a video, so I'm going to make like Kiss in the 80s and jump on this trend. 10 albums here, and I only own 5 of them. So for the other 5 that I don't own, which should come as no surprise because they are so bad, right? Why would I want them in my collection? For the 5 that I don't own, I'm going to be just putting a picture of the album on the screen, and you'll hear me talking about it in the background. But I'm going to get right into it. 10 terrible rock and metal albums that are not Saint Anger. If you hear an album here that you like, please don't jump down my throat. It's a subjective thing. It's my opinion. But please do let me know in the comments below if you guys can come up with any other terrible rock and metal albums that are not Saint Anger that would also fit on this list, right? So let's get right into it with my first pick. So the first pick I'm going to make today, I'm going to go with Angry Machines by Dio, released in 1996. Just a really weak album from Dio. With the rise of industrial metal and grunge in the early to mid 90s, Dio definitely got lost in the shuffle, and he put out a few really angry albums in the early to mid 90s, right? This is the follow-up to Strange Highways in 1993. Of course, before that, Dio had reunited in 92 with Black Sabbath to record Dehumanizer. That reunion did not last very long, so Dio had a pretty rough 90s, right? But this album, definitely the worst that he ever put out, in my opinion. Just super weak, nothing memorable. Honest to God, there's 10 tracks on here, and I don't think I can name one that I would consider memorable or enjoyable or, a song that I would go back and listen to. I never listened to this album. I have no desire to, and, I just really don't have anything nice to say about this album, to be completely honest. Here's the guys on the back here. You can almost see in Dio's face, he knows this is going to be a misfire, and it totally was. Angry Machines from 1996, my first pick here for a terrible rock and metal album that is not Saint Anger. Next up, I'm going to go with 1981's Music from the Elder by Kiss. Kiss trying to change things up here. Beginning of the 80s, they worked with Bob Ezrin, trying to make a conceptual piece here with orchestral elements as well, but just an absolute disaster of an album, right? So not what Kiss was at the time, and would never really be again, right? This was never Kiss's style, and, the last album to feature Ace Frehley on guitar, a pretty bad way for Ace to go out here. The first album to feature Eric Carr on drums, replacing Peter Criss. Just terrible, terrible stuff here. And, it's considered to be one of the worst albums ever made. I'd absolutely agree with that. I'd say there's a handful of okay songs, right? I like A World Without Heroes, and The Oath is okay as well. But the other stuff on this album is just absolutely deplorable, miserable stuff here, And I don't know, maybe had this album come out 10 years earlier, maybe it would have, gone over a little bit better with music critics, but in 1981 with, the new wave of British heavy metal coming in and just all these awesome bands like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, just to name a couple, really picking up stride, right, really finding their own place in the music business, Kiss was getting left behind, and The Elder did them no favors, right? Just a miserable album, one I would never listen to, and, just there's nothing on here for me. It does absolutely nothing for me, so an absolute terrible album that is not Saint Anger. Next up, I'm going to go with Nostradamus by Judas Priest from 2008. This was the follow-up to Angel of Retribution from 2005, which featured the return of Rob Halford, right? Really the return to form for Judas Priest. And then Nostradamus came out 3 years later, and, I think they really had to follow up Angel of Retribution with another great album to really reaffirm that they were back, just like old times. And this album just falls flat in so many ways. I think Priest was trying to do something almost Iron Maiden-esque here, right, with the awesome concept and, all these songs on the back, and it just falls so flat, like I said, just so boring in my opinion. It does nothing for me, and, I'm so disappointed in this album because, honestly, it probably could have been really cool, right? Think about it on paper, Judas Priest writing a concept album. That sounds awesome. But, so many people have written about Nostradamus, this and that, and it just, like I said, fell flat. That's the best way I can describe it. It fell flat. And there's really nothing on here that does anything for me, Now I'm looking now, trying to, say something positive, name at least one or two standout tracks. I really can't. I'm not into anything on here. It just pretty boring stuff, right? A terrible rock and metal album that is not Saint Anger. Nostradamus by Judas Priest from 2008. Next up, how about Eat the Heat by Accept, right? Accept, the powerful German heavy metal band that have been around for over 40 years now. And, think about this. Accept doing a glam hair metal album. Sounds like a fever dream, right? Well, it came true in 1989 when they released Eat the Heat. Udo Dirkschneider out of the band, replaced by David Reese on vocals, and this album is just such a disaster. It's so cringeworthy and just such a far departure from what Accept was and, is to this day. Kind of like The Elder by Kiss, just it's so not them and just an absolute dreadful listen. I obviously don't own it, and I have zero intention of ever owning this album. It is so bad that, I think I would rather go and listen to, 3 hours of whatever garbage music is trending now than sit and listen to this album just once. It's that bad. I would rather do anything except listen to Eat the Heat, right? So, a terrible, terrible, terrible rock and metal album that is not Saint Anger. Eat the Heat from 1989 by Next up, I'm going to go with Riot Act by Pearl Jam. I love Pearl Jam, but this album just bores me to tears. It does absolutely nothing for me. I know that this album has, its supporters out there, but I'm just not one of them. I can't stand this album. It's just so boring, does nothing for me. The only reason I even own it is because I found it for like $1 in the used CDs bin at a record store, so I figured, what the heck, I'll pick it up. But aside from, I'd say maybe Save You and I Am Mine, it just does nothing for me. There's too many tracks on here that just do nothing for me, right? So, Pearl Jam, Riot Act, definitely got to be on the list. I can't stand it. It's so boring. I feel like I'm repeating myself. Boring, boring, boring. It's boring, and it's got to be on the list, right? Coming up next, 1999's Risk by Megadeth. I think the whole problem with this album is really in the title of the release, which is Risk, right? Megadeth took a risk, and it did not pay off. When you take a risk in the music business, it's either going to go one way or another. There really is no in between, and it just did Megadeth no favors. Megadeth, Dave Mustaine in particular, really wanting to write a radio hit, so this album just full of commercial garbage and commercial garbage. What more can I say? It doesn't do anything in the least bit for me. I think that Megadeth should just stick to the thrash metal stuff because that's where they thrive, right? Dave Mustaine is a tremendous guitarist. He's a very good lyricist, and I think that when you go the commercial route, they're not going to find the same results as Metallica. And Metallica took a calculated risk, but they had guys like, Bob Rock in there working with them, holding their hand the entire time when they put out the Black Album. So that might explain why their risk paid off and Megadeth's didn't, This would also be the last album to feature Marty Friedman on guitar and Nick Menza departing the band. It's the first album to feature Jimmy DeGrasso on the drums. And Dave Mustaine has said maybe any other band would have put out this kind of an album, right, with the title being Risk. It would have sold much better, but the fact that it was Megadeth taking a risk here, it didn't pay off, and I absolutely see why. I really don't enjoy anything off this album, and, that's fine, it's a subjective thing, but Risk by Megadeth definitely has to be on my list. How about No Prayer for the Dying by Iron Maiden from 1990? It just is the worst Iron Maiden album in my opinion. I think there's a huge departure in quality here from the predecessor Seventh Son, and then here the follow-up No Prayer for the Dying, and it really shows what Iron Maiden is missing when Adrian Smith is not on guitar, not writing vocals, or not writing lyrics, for the album. Adrian, of course, would leave the band following the Seventh Son tour, and and I love Maiden. You can see I got my shirt on, right? I love Maiden, but I just can't stand this album. It's terrible. There's a lot of cheesy lyrics here. Tail Gunner's okay. Holy Smoke is fun. Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter. Mother Russia. Okay stuff, right? But just a lot of throwaway songs, a lot of cheesy lyrics, a lot of, stuff that is very un-Maiden on here. Maybe they're trying to go back to their sort of punky kind of roots here. Back to the Roots album sometimes works, sometimes they don't. Definitely didn't work in Maiden's case here. 1990s, No Prayer for the Dying on my list. And I love Maiden, like I said, but this album just doesn't do it for me. Next up, from 2011, I'm going to go with the collaboration between Lou Reed and Metallica. LULU. I didn't even want to put the album cover up on the screen because it's just so grotesque, right? So here are the guys instead. You got Metallica and Lou Reed. And this album, definitely polarizing and for all the wrong reasons, For me personally, I can't stand it. I don't own it, don't want to own it. And, I tried to listen to it. I tried to give it a chance the first time. And, track number 1, Brandenburg Gate, I heard the first few vocals from Lou Reed, and I got so turned off to it, you know. But I did force myself to listen to the whole thing just once, and just horrible, horrible stuff. You know, just really frustrating, because Metallica had just put out Death Magnetic in 2008, and that was a return to form for them, right? Going back to the metal stuff, and I think a lot of people thought, awesome, Metallica's back, and then they go out and they collaborate with Lou Reed, and they just put out this disaster. I don't really even consider this a Metallica album, more of a Lou Reed album with Metallica just playing in the background. Well, Lou Reed talks about God knows what, right? Like I said, does nothing for me, and I can't stand this album. So, gotta put it on the list. Lulu by Metallica and Lou Reed from 2011. Next up, now we're into the final two, and I'm going to go with Zipper Catches Skin by Alice Cooper from 1982. Oh, man. Alice had seen better days here. You can see a picture of him on the back. He looks pretty rough. I talked about this a little bit at more length yesterday in my Alice Cooper discography ranking, which I'll leave the link to that video in the description if you have any interest in checking that out. But, yeah, Alice putting out just a disaster of an album. It's been described as just a cracked out mess. Alice so deep into his cocaine addiction here that he couldn't even think straight, just rambling about God knows what on here. Does nothing for me. I don't enjoy it at all. In my opinion, it's one of the worst albums ever made, and just it has to be on the list. This is actually the first album I thought of when, I was putting together my list. So, gotta put Zipper Catches Skin on here by Alice Cooper. Unfortunately, this is a pretty unfortunate time for Alice. It's sad more than anything else, but it's gotta go on here, right? Coming up next, I think I saved the worst for last. I'm going to go with Forbidden by Black Sabbath from 1995. There's a lot of bad things at play on this album. The cover is terrible, which, they say don't judge a book by its cover, but in this case, you absolutely can. Then you get into the album. It's just terrible production on here, produced by Ernie C. of Body Count, and I have no idea why they decided to go with him as the producer, because this album sounds terrible. And, of course, you've got Ice-T rapping on Illusion of Power, the opener to this album. I have no idea why we have rappers on Black Sabbath albums. I mean, just such a far departure from, the early stuff. I mean, my God, could you imagine playing this album for Tony Iommi while they were, touring, supporting Paranoid in the early 70s, right? I mean, my God. And, this album, so bad. And not the fault of Tony Martin, who does a serviceable job in his entire time with Sabbath, right? I think Tony Martin doesn't deserve all of the hate. All the blame has to go on Tony Iommi for making a lot of questionable decisions on here, and Ernie C., the producer, who just, like I said, did a terrible job, right? Fans clamoring at this point for a reunion with Ozzy, and finally, in 1999, they would reunite with Ozzy, but I mean, not before they hit an absolute rock bottom here with Forbidden in 1995. In my opinion, the worst album ever made in heavy metal. Gotta be on my list, right? And so there you have it. There are 10 rock and metal albums that are not Saint Anger, right? I think we can finally shine a light on some of these bad albums and not talk about Saint Anger, at least for today. Saint Anger, off the hook, right? Until next time, it's the CD guy, Johnny Z here, signing off. Take care, guys.